Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have this conversation with you over the next 2 hours about Synchronist and how we're getting back into Blaine, Canada, and how we're going to handle that. Those that are on that don't know that might be new, the BEST committee is made up of all the energy companies in Iowa. Those that are represented from Mid-America is Catherine Kunert, Deb Calvert, Kelly Swinson. From Alliant Energy, it's Scott Drzezinski and myself, David Vollmer, I'm the key account manager. And then Casey Woodside is with Black Hills Energy Group, and then Bruce Hansen represents Iowa Area Development Group and the RECs throughout the state. We're also our group that puts all this together for us and does all the behind work with the calculations and the graphs and keeps us looking very sharp is Drew Conrad and Christine Reichen from the University of Northern Iowa Institute for Decision Making. So if you think of a question today, but you don't want to wait till the end, go ahead and throw it into the chat feature. I will watch that and make sure that we get those questions answered as we're going through. I'm kind of your facilitator today, and we'll be kind of bouncing us around to our different groups. But first, we're going to talk about the new Synchronist questions that are out there, the questionnaire, and we're going to turn it over to Kelly Swinson with Mid-American Energy. Kelly, you want to talk to us about that, please?
Absolutely. Let me get my screen shared here for you. Can you hear me all right?
We got you just fine, or I do. Yep.
All right. Well, again, thanks, David. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I guess. Still stuck in the morning here. I'll keep my comments pretty short here, so we can get to kind of the fun stuff, I guess. And just wanted to share a few important updates and a little bit on the timeline for Best of Iowa in 2021. First and foremost, I guess, thank you to everyone for joining today and making Best of Iowa and business retention expansion part of your programs of work. I think all of us agree that the visits with businesses are extremely valuable, and I guess I just want to take the opportunity to applaud you all for elevating this effort in your communities. So thank you for that. I heard from many of you that our businesses are starting to look forward to these calls, and they're calling out to you in several instances if they haven't heard from you in a year, looking for the chance to meet with us. So those are great things. And so I guess that leads into the first, if you haven't started making your appointments, now is a great time to start and making those, the virtual, in-person, and even in some cases, email connections with those businesses. Obviously, email is the least personable way to connect with them, but maybe the last chance opportunity if you can't get an in-person one, go ahead and just send the form out and see what you get back too. But the management team is, ready to jump in and provide the time and the resources to help y'all so communicate with us, as frequently as you're wanting to. Obviously, of course, we're gonna stay in touch along the way too. So it's a two-way going to be all the way through this till the end of the year. So you all should have received your target visit list of businesses that we would like you to connect with. If you haven't, make sure you let us know on this call, and we'll get it to you ASAP. Best really wants us, to prioritize and schedule visits and time to meet with the businesses in that list that are identified as the Category 1 business, and those that have not been met with in the last year. So make those your first priority. See if you can get those on the calendar, get them scheduled right away, because those are ones that we need to get in with pretty quickly. So if you need any assistance making connections, let us know. Our utility partners, we have connections through our account managers and other opportunities to get in with these businesses that might help us open those doors as well. So feel free to connect with us anytime if you need that help. I guess, thanks to everyone for providing feedback on your target lists and making updates, so timely. And if there's additional businesses that you'd like to have added, or maybe there's some that are needing to be removed, just let us know. We're constantly monitoring that target list, and we want to have the most accurate, best list out there. So let us know. One of the best goals this year is to work really closely with community representatives from counties that have no or limited participation in the past. And so we have that, statewide input across our entire footprint. Best of Iowa is a statewide program, so we want to have that, and we're gonna elevate some of our chances or efforts to connect with some of you folks out there in areas that don't have a lot of representation out there right now. So look forward to that coming as well. I guess, the final point here is, I personally, I find it hard to believe that, we're really only 6 months away until our data poll for 2021, the best annual report. So that date is September 7th. We're right there at that 6-month mark, and that's pretty consistent with what we've done in the past. Last year was obviously a little different. We extended that out a month to give a little more time because of our transition, with a new questionnaire and things like that. So looking back a little bit at 2020, it was successful in many ways. And, we quickly transitioned from in-person interviews to meeting virtually. We also completely updated our interview questionnaire form to be more relevant, to the current business climate. A lot of the questions in the past were not, applicable, and in some cases, maybe even a little bit insensitive to ask, given that all the businesses were going through. So over the past, several months, since we wrapped up last season's call, we focused on the management team, University of Northern Iowa and Blaine, Canada, worked together to develop an updated interview form for this year. If you don't have a copy of the latest interview form, you can go download it from Synchronist, and there's a screenshot here on there that shows you where to go once you're logged in. If you go to Tools and Settings, and then Blank Forms, you can click the download, and the form is available in either Word or PDF versions. So the PDF that we have out there is fillable, so you can download that, enter the key in the data, it'll resize it all nicely for you. You can save it yourself and store it for later use as well. But number one, make sure that you toss out the 2020 interview form that we had for last year, because it is not going to be used this year. Get a copy of the new form. So that's the main takeaway here. The new form, it's actually really similar to last year's. The most noticeable difference that you're going to see in the questionnaire is a little bit in the wording of the questions. Some of the response options are a little bit different, but then also the flow. The broad categories, going into the flow of it, the broad categories really haven't changed that much. So you got the bullet points there, the product, market, and on down. Those categories are consistent. We've seen those year after year, but there are a couple new questions in some of those categories, so get familiar with them. One of them is on real estate requirements. So has some of the real estate requirements changed in communities? Also asking about strategies for workforce recruitment. I think there's a lot of information to be gathered from that as well. But then there's also things like mental health, and if the businesses offer resources for mental health. So some new questions in there. Take a look at it. I think you'll enjoy them. A lot of time really has gone into making a great set of questions for, I guess, your BRE experience, honestly. So the best part of this whole thing is that the interview questions have already been programmed into Synchronist. It's in there already, ready to be used. And when you complete a visit, you'll enter your response directly into the company record within Synchronist this year. The system is, and then you'll have complete control of all of your data in the system like you had, in prior years. So we've reverted back to the process of using Synchronist as the input tool and Synchronist as the interview form for completing BRE visits. So those are the big updates. Happy to take any questions if there are any right now, but otherwise, David, I think I'll turn it back to you to kind of get on with the rest of the information today.
We had a couple of questions about the questionnaire, but I think you've covered those. We're going back to the old, to what we were using before with a couple changes. So make sure they get to the new form. If somebody else has a different question out there, I'll take a couple questions real quick if somebody's got anything. All right. Hearing none, I'll
I'm
have
off the hook,
you.
huh?
Yeah, I'll have you take off that you're sharing, Kelly. If you get out.
You got it.
Yeah. Hold on. Say
It's all
again.
yours.
Where's the new format? The new form is on the Synchronist site. When you
Yep,
log
so
in, there'll be a.
if you
looks
log
like-
into Synchronist, you can download the new form directly from there from Tools, blank forms. If you're a person that does interviews but don't enter the data, just get a hold of whoever the sub-license holder is that your data is entered under, and have them download the form. Otherwise, maybe what we can do is follow in an email follow-up to our presentation today. We can include a copy of that PDF version and send out to everybody on the call as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Kelly. Greatly appreciated. We're going to move on to using and presenting your data. If you've gotten to the work and done all the interviews, how are we going to present that? So I'm going to turn this over to Drew Conrad and Christy Reichen with University of Northern Iowa Strategic Marketing Services and Institute for Decision Making. And I don't know who's starting first, Drew or Christy? Both of you are on mute yet, I think.
All right, can you hear me now?
I got you now, Drew. Yep.
All right, what Christy and I want to do here over the next 20 or so minutes is share with you kind of some best practices and how to think about the data. Because one of the things we often, when we're talking with developers, is questions about how do I use the data, what can I do? And really the trick is, from our perspective, is tell a story as opposed to just telling numbers or giving facts. And so we're also want to spend a little time and talk about share how to actually use some of the data. So with that, let's talk about storytelling. So Christy, if you want to go to the next slide. One of the best ways is to think about it from the standpoint, how does the data, how does the information that we've gathered through our visits tell the current state of our key employers? And as Kelly highlighted the kind of the theme areas out of the interview questions, they can tell some great stories. One of the examples, or one of the key questions is, where are they at with their primary product or service in their life cycle? Or do I have a lot of employers that I've interviewed that are growing or merging versus maturing and declining? Are they innovating? That's one of the big things. And in two questions in particular on the instrument interview questions really get at that from the standpoint of, are they introducing new products and services, or do they plan to? As we always look at the data, it's always a red flag for us if we see a large percentage of companies that have not introduced new product or services in the last 3 years. Previously, it was last 5 years, and don't have anything planned on the horizon. And so, that innovation. Also stability. One of the red flags we always say on is there a change in management or ownership? And one of the new questions added in this past year and is going to continue in the new form is about succession planning. And if you look at the landscape of Iowa-owned companies, there's a lot of baby boomers who own companies, and so succession planning is really important from that. And so, these are some key stories that you can tell and tease out. Also, from the standpoint of, one of the biggest reasons why we're doing these visits is to identify opportunities and challenges. So focus on those. What are there? Obviously, the potential expansion questions are critically important and can tell a lot. What size of expansion, and obviously, some of this information you need to keep. You don't want to share broadly, but if you can aggregate it, if you can pull out the story of how the state of your local economy or regional economy is, it's real important. And then also I mentioned the challenges. Are there any challenges? And obviously this past year now has been pretty challenging, and so from businesses around the state of Iowa. So the new 2020 instrument that was used, there was a number of questions around financial situation and COVID recovery. And so a specific question was asked about financial stress. and also impacts on their supply chain disruption in both in the past year and going forward, and how those disruptions may interrupt or may impact their operations. So all of them can kind of tell the situation and help explain how the story is of your local businesses. And even if you only have a couple synchronous visits done or completed, at least there is information there that you can use. Maybe it's only on a limited basis. Maybe it's just integrating it into presentations you're making to your board and your newsletter you're sending out to your investors or whatever. But just any snapshot that you can pull is useful and helpful. And also, if you've been doing it for a number of years, compare your data over time and also compare your data statewide. And you may not have an apples to oranges comparison, but you can look at how do we compare. So, I mentioned the growing, emerging versus maturing, declining. If I've interviewed 10 companies in my county, how does that percentage of them compare statewide? Or how about the introduction of new products and services? How do they compare from the growth standpoint from that as well to the state of Iowa? And with the local reporting tool that's out on the Best of Iowa website, you can download that and take a deep look and look at how those measures at the statewide level compare to what you've done and found out through your interviews within your community, your county, or your region. So, understanding, do I have similar or different types of challenges and opportunities? We see some common themes as we look at the statewide data, but we also see some unique themes from specific regions of the state. And so understanding that, how I match up from that standpoint. Christy, you have anything to add on the storytelling component of it?
No, I get the fun job of talking about how to make things look really cool. So.
And that's a critical component.
Yep.
Of how you present the data, how you present the stories. So with that, why don't you start sharing a few of the tips you have?
Let's see here. There we go. Sorry, having some tech challenges here. So Drew has talked to you a little bit about what the story might be, where to look to find information to share with the people important to you, your board, your investors, but how do you make it look nice and tell it with visual perspective? And so incorporate anything you can that it looks like an infographic, using SmartArt, which is part of Microsoft Office suite of products, or graphs. Use that whenever possible. And there's some really easy design friendly programs out there that you can use in Microsoft Office, like Publisher. PowerPoint is actually one of my favorite little go-to tools to create some custom graphics, and I'm going to show you a few examples of that here in a couple minutes. Or you can get really advanced if you have the capacity yourself or within your organization. Use Adobe Suite programs and make something look really fantastic. Tell a story visually. People hear and see at the same time. So I'm kind of a foodie, and I always say you eat first with your eyes. And it's kind of the same thing here, is people see things and process visuals sometimes before they process the audio portion of what they're trying to learn. So one of the things you can do pretty easily is customize the colors and fonts to match your organization's brand. Try to make everything you publish or put out in social media look visually the same colors and schemes. Like, try to have that identity that crosses over. The other thing to do, and we talked a little about, is try to turn graphs and tables into infographics. A lot of people respond better to that kind of information, especially if they're not from a data kind of background. They learn better with graphics. So I'm going to share a few examples here. Here is an example of one of the graphs that comes in the statewide local template that you can have access to by just emailing Matt Codis. It will come preloaded with your data. You will have a graph that looks exactly like this. But these probably are not the colors of your organization, and it's just kind of the standard Microsoft Office color scheme. However, by playing around a little bit, you can make something that looks more like this. So I stuck with the Best of Iowa Management Team color scheme to show you how I can modify some of those things to make it look very cohesive with their branding. So you can see I changed the colors of the bars, I changed the font, I relocated the legend just to make it lay out a little bit better. So these are all really easy things you can do within Excel to the graphs to make your end products look a little bit more professional. Another fun thing you can do is look at how you can turn this graph that we just looked at, or maybe a table, you want to just use a simple table, into a more customized infographic look. Here's one I made in probably like 5 minutes. And I know I'm maybe not your average person trying to do this. I've had a lot of experience. This is using SmartArt, and in a couple minutes I'm actually build one and show it to you and show you how easy it is to do. So rather than just using a bar chart here, I put it in an infographic, and you can kind of see I strategically placed each of the life cycle options kind of in the direction of the arrow. So the growing is kind of, it's pointing down a little bit, but we're growing. Maturing is down, declining is down, emerging is pointing up. So kind of think in those terms when you're creating these visual elements to kind of make sure it makes sense by your placement. Another example is, here's one about recruitment problems. Did your organization experience those? You can see it was about a 50-50 split at this local level, the sample data, and how it compares to state. Again, here's just a quick graphic I made using SmartArt in PowerPoint to just show the local numbers and use elements that already exist. And I also incorporated some additional information, like for the people that said they were experiencing recruitment problems, these are the specific positions that they mention most often. So not only do you know that about half of the companies in your area have recruitment problems, you can know that they also really need production workers, skilled maintenance, mechanics, machinists, and customer service folks. So now hopefully this is going to work. I'm going to stop sharing if I can make this work here. All right, so we're going to go down and I'm going to show you how to build a SmartArt infographic. So here's just a blank page, and I'm going to go to the insert window up here, and you can see here's the SmartArt option here in the middle. And you click on that and you see a whole bunch of stuff. This is just a really fun thing to play around with if you haven't already. And I'm going to first show you how to create the life cycle one. So it's really important as you're trying to pick a visual element to kind of know I need 4 data points and they all kind of are interrelated, and that will help you decide which of these SmartArt graphics might work best for the information you're trying to visually display. And so as you click down here, just keep going to the bottom, there's literally tons and tons of options. Life cycle, and here they have a whole grouping of things called cycle, so that's really kind of a no-brainer. The one I selected and liked was this one with some text. So I simply click on it, say okay, and I'm just going to resize that down a little bit here. So you can see right going into it, it's already color coded to the color palette I had selected for this presentation. There are 5 data points. I really only need 4, so I'm going to get rid of one of these by just simply deleting that up. And you can see it already kind of auto sizes it right for me. And then I just simply start typing in my information. And I can put in my percentages like this and so forth. And you just kind of keep going around until you do that. One thing I felt was missing is there was no real title for this slide. So all I did is I went and I again went to insert over to text box, and I created something here in the middle that I'm just going to call local. And we'll get this bumped up a little larger here. And you could simply stop there, but I also wanted to layer in a circle, give some dimension to it underneath. So I'm going to again go to Insert tab and to Shapes right above Smart Art. And I just simply went with a circular shape here that you can kind of eyeball it if you want. If you're somebody like me who likes things perfectly centered, you just come up here to the format and you can make sure it's a perfect circle. And if I don't like this color, I can decide I want something a little less eye-catching. And you'll notice it's covering up my text. That's okay. I'm going to send it backward. That means it will place it underneath the previous thing I had made. And so very quickly, you can see in just a couple minutes, we can have something that looks pretty nice. You can, of course, go in and you can change out colors to any of these different elements if you like. The text is very easy to manipulate. It's just something you need to play around a little bit with until you get a little bit more comfortable. And I'm just going to select all this stuff so it will stay together. One other nice thing is when you're done formatting it and you're totally ready to kind of finalize it, is it's nice to go select each of the different elements and come over here and go to this little thing. It's called grouping objects here. And if I group that, all of those things that were independent or singular objects are now grouped together. So I move it around, I can move it as one unit. It's kind of a nice little feature.
Christy, can you share a little about exporting this out?
Yeah. So one nice thing to think about is when you are building something either in PowerPoint, like this infographic I just demoed, or even a graph in an Excel file, when you paste it into a different program like Word, say you're working on a report or even Publisher or PowerPoint for a presentation, it's always good to paste it in as, here, let me just copy this real quick with a quick format. And then when I go to paste it, you'll see there's lots of different options. I can paste it as the theme, or I can paste it as a picture. It's always good to paste it as a picture or an object. The thing being is that if I try to scale this one that's all separate objects down, you can see it doesn't stay in the right, it's not scalable. It kind of handles each thing separate. If I paste it in as an image, the ratio of sizes of everything will always stay the same. So it makes it much easier to resize, whether you're doing this Word or PowerPoint or Publisher. And also, it doesn't make your file size so large. So if you're sharing this electronically, when you're done, your file size will be much more manageable size.
And also from the standpoint of that's an image now, and so you can use it, let's say, if in your social media efforts and other types of publications.
Yep. So one thing I might do with this graphic now that's an image is I would come back over to the format and I would crop it and get rid of some of this excess here on the side. And so you can make it fit a lot more nicely into a report or another slide deck. And there you've got that. And if you want to save this as an individual image, you just can right click, save as picture, and you can save it to any location. So again, if you wanted to put this on a LinkedIn or other social media platform, you've got an individual image that you can just very easily pull in. And you can have something literally in a matter of minutes to work with. Are there any questions? I think that's really all I can show you demoing another graphic, but I feel like, it's just a process of finding one that works visually for the data you're trying to represent, and just a matter of layering smart art, shapes, text boxes, and kind of playing with the colors and shifting things around until you get something that you really like visually.
Christy, do you want to show the local template and how easy it is to make adjustments to charts in that? If we don't have any questions, otherwise let's take some questions.
Yeah, let me see if I can figure out how to not share anywhere. There we go. Okay, can everyone see an Excel file now?
Yes.
Okay, so here is one of the graphs. This is what it would look like coming in. And I lost my cursor. I'm having two screens and it's causing me some grief here. Here we go. Here's the one I showed in the presentation, the recruitment problem one that I tweaked a little bit. So let's say I want to do this high value or loss of high value employee ones. I've already changed the color palette here in the information, and I can show you how to do that here really quickly. You just go into page layout and colors over here. And I already have a couple best ones that I've created, but you can just create a custom one for your own organization here at the bottom by just selecting this, and you simply go through here. You can do more colors, and that will allow you to kind of type in some codes and things like that. But it's very simple. You might have to play around with the order a little bit until you find something you like, and you can save it, and you can use it on any other Microsoft Office program. So it will be there in PowerPoint and Word also, or Publisher. So it's very quick to do. If I want to change the color of the bars, I just simply highlight them one at a time, go to the Format tab, and I can apply one of the theme colors that I have pre-programmed into here. And the nice thing is it gives you all these different shades of colors too. I don't know how much you guys have played around with that. And then I can go in here and select something else. If I want to change the size, I can make it a little larger. The other thing is you see there's not very much data here in the not sure. One thing I did with recruitment problems is I just took that out because it's not really all that valuable, and you just can highlight the data there and it will automatically pull those out for you. The font size now looks a little small, so I might go in there and bump that up a little bit. Same with the scale here and the title. And again, if I want to change the font, I can go in there and do something like that. One other nice little tool is once you click on here and you hit the little plus button here, if you just highlight there, all of the different things that you may want to add or subtract from a graph are right there. So the legend, for instance, I can take that on and off by just a little click of a button. And let's say instead of data having the legend and data labels, maybe I want a data table. I want to show that percentage underneath rather than here on top, and I can just pull those off. That's a common thing we do a lot, and the work we do for clients is this is a nice thing. If it's not too complicated, like a yes/no question like this, I think a data table looks really great. If you have, a lot of different elements going on, those can get a little crazy, and I wouldn't recommend that. Another thing, if you don't like the overall look, if you go to the Design tab up here, once you have a graph selected, right up here is a whole bunch of preloaded designs. Now, I don't love that the background became this color, but you can see how you can just easily pick one of these as kind of a starting point if you like one of these a little bit better than what you come loaded on. So like, for instance, let's see, I think I had, let's take this one. I don't really like the colored background, so I'm just going to click on that and remove that and take that off. And then, of course, these colors are not real attractive on that other background, so I can just, whoops, sorry, that's the wrong one here. Make those something else. And you can see very quickly how you can make some really nice changes to a graph going forward. So
I think the important thing is to realize, there's a lot of things that can be done to enhance the data you're sharing, the information you're sharing by using just basic, Microsoft products. PowerPoint isn't just for presentations, is one of the big takeaways. So. Are there any questions?
I think one of the things people need to realize is, not everybody has a big budget, right? Not everybody has Dan McDonald's budget. Okay, we got to just agree right there. So from Dubuque, we got to agree that we don't have that. But there are community colleges, there are high schools, there's kids out there that understand these graphics and how to put these programs together for you, that are willing to build their resumes and to do things. Keep in mind that they're out there, and we will share this recording that you'll be able to go back through a little bit slower and kind of click and follow and try it on your own as well. It's out there for you in your community a little bit, I think.
And one thing I'll add in there that, I see Sharon like complimenting Christy, saying like, this would be its own great 1-hour tutorial. I mean, that's kind of the beautiful thing about this. It's like, Christy did all of this in Excel. It's available to you already in the template that we send to you. And, if you want, we're going to be sending a recording of this out afterwards. So if you want to like slow down, go at your own speed, rewind, fast forward, like this will all be available to you after the meeting, probably up on the BEST website. Yeah. And obviously, if you have questions, reach out to us. We're more than happy to help.
Yeah. And there's a lot of great
Are there any more questions?
Yep. You can find tutorials on YouTube and other sites. So don't be afraid to seek those out and learn. You probably learn a bunch of stuff I don't even know, because I've just kind of learned by use over the years.
Yeah, I was going to add that when Christy's not around, my go-to source is YouTube for figuring some of these things out.
I think that's one great thing about this program.
The one last thing that I would suggest, and we've learned this over the years now of having done the statewide report for so long, is, once you kind of figure out some templates, go with them. Try to automate the processes for you going forward, and that's what we've tried to do with the local template. But if there's if there's a core set of 10 questions that year in and year out you use out of the Synchronist survey interview questions, figure out what the best graphics are for that, and year in and year out use those so you can just plug and play.
Yeah. I don't think you should feel a lot of pressure to redesign every year. I think, have a few core elements like Drew said, and maybe just swap out a theme. Like you probably noticed how that's what we do in our annual report. Sometimes we've used lines, we've used hexagons, we use kind of a flowy, curvy line this year. So there's ways to kind of enhance the visual elements without starting completely from zero. And so once you kind of get that baseline report, then the next time look how can I change things up just a little bit so it looks fresh, but it's still consistent and similar to what we did last year.
And I don't think there's any secrets in what we're doing or shared that we can't share information. So if you see that neighbors doing something in a different county that you like, call them up. There's no reason why we can't share information among ourselves, because in the end, all we're trying to do is make our company stronger and our state stronger. Last call for any questions for Drew and Kristen. Somebody just put out there, if you weren't following chat, that you can go to Engage, ENGAGE.com for $100 a year and get all kinds of graphics if you're working on that to help with your presentation. So
I can mention.
Hold on, we got one question.
I can mention really quickly. It's Vengage, and it's a infographic that has tons of templates, and it's a little bit like Canva, but it's a little more advanced and has better graphics as far as like your graphs and those kinds of things, and they give a discount if you are a nonprofit. So, and they don't specify C6 or C3. So,
okay, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, we are going to move into our local data solutions. We've got some local partners that are going to be presenting kind of what they're doing, how they're using the data. And I think we're going to start with Don Larson. Don, I am going to pull up your presentation for you. And what I'd like for you to do is, well, let me start with who our group is today. We have Don Larson with the City of Fort Dodge. We have Laura Thomas with the Cedar Rapids Metro Economic Development Alliance. And we have Ryan Carroll with the Greater Des Moines Partnership that's going to be sharing with us. So when I introduce them, I'm going to have them talk a little bit how long they've been in business, what they currently do, their position. Everybody write this down. This is what's coming to you next year. You got to answer. And then I will drive for you, Don. And Laura, I can bring yours up too and drive for you if you want me to as well when we get to that. So I'm going to start with bringing up Don's. Share content. Dun, dun. All right, can everybody see that? Can everybody see the page that I'm on? Hello?
We cannot.
Anybody? Uh-oh, okay. Why is it not sharing? It says I'm presenting, isn't that nice? Hold on, let me click out and come right back to you. Hold on, everybody just.
Hey, Dave, if you want, I have Don's presentation. I can bring it up on mine and drive.
Go ahead, master tech person. Don, I'll turn it over to you while he's bringing that up. Go ahead, introduce yourself. So.
Okay, thank
Oh, there we
you.
go.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dawn Larson, Economic Development Specialist with the City of Fort Dodge. And Drew, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I oversee and operate the BR&E program for the city. So in essence, gather the data from the businesses. Then the Greater Fort Dodge Growth Alliance, which is our organization that provides both economic and chamber services, prepares the report. So before I dive into the report preparation, I wanted to provide a few tips that I have learned over 10 plus years of gathering data from the businesses that I feel are very important and factors that I always try to follow. The first one is make sure that you ask for specifics on responses from the business leaders. A good example would be, let's say they say transportation is a weakness for them within the community or within the area. So dive deeper. Why is transportation a problem? What barriers does it create for them? It's very helpful once you do start diving deeper into that data. The other tip is make sure that you set up a procedure for follow-up items to ensure that those assistance tasks are completed and all actions are recorded. I like to document this directly into my survey form for that year. I document what the problem was, what was done, also who possibly I referred the situation to, and then note any follow-up items that took place. That way I have that information directly on the survey when I meet with them again the following year. Lastly, there are reports available on Synchronist for a reason. It's very, very helpful to take a deep dive into your data with these reports. I listed some of the reports that I like to use. Community strengths and weaknesses. That one is self-explanatory. That just basically dives into the responses from the businesses on the strengths and weaknesses as a place to do business within your community. Company rankings by peer group, that dives into your VGRS data. So helps you identify what companies are showing that high value, high growth, and then of course that risk factor. Your expansion opportunities report is basically your investment forecast report, and that identifies what potential expansions that you noted during your visits, and it gives you an opportunity to make sure that you follow up on a timely manner on those opportunities. And likewise, the expansion growth and warning report ties into that. And then lastly, your skills, your workforce skills gap report that really identifies what positions the businesses have identified as available, but also the ones that are challenging to fill. As Drew stated, there is a built-in story to be told in all the data that we collect, and it really, in essence, is storytelling. So make sure that you appeal to your audience with relatable narratives. It helps them understand what you're trying to communicate. I've also found that while you're conducting your data analysis, make sure to identify and include any problems that have arisen during your data gathering, and also a need that possibly has been identified and a project or initiative that's been devised. I guess a good example of this for our community was it was noted that childcare was consistently ranking very low within our community services rating process. And so it prompted us to connect with other community partners and put together a Fort Dodge childcare work group to remedy and find solutions for our childcare challenges. So as you're putting that report together, there's a two-prong approach. I would recommend sketching out your framework and using structural elements to build a foundation for organizing, categorizing, and narrating those results. Then, in essence, provide the content around that story to get your reader invested in the outcome. So the Greater Fort Dodge Growth Alliance annual report for last year had some essential structural elements, and I thought I would share those. They do a great job on putting that annual report together, and they start off with a executive summary, or basically a year in review. How did we get here? What has transpired over the past year? Then the next section dives into economic development summary. So basically community projects, expansions, or investments that have taken place in the last year. Next, what do we do? So the Growth Alliance highlights their impact and the benefits that they have had on the community and some of the great initiatives that they've implemented. The next item is they do dive into some information about Webster County's economy. Last year, or last report, included kind of a brief tie-in of the GRP into our manufacturing sector, and that the manufacturing sector within our county does make up nearly 40% of our economy. Then she did a great job highlighting some of the top 10 state and county economic sectors and kind of did a comparison to the state, the county. Next, interpreting results. So this is what I always call our meat and potatoes of our report. It takes the data and highlights and compares some of that data. Typically, we highlight the fundamentals. So basically the community services and how those were rated. Some of the areas that we need to look at improving and some of the areas where we're doing a great job. Another area that I noted is it is good to possibly look into the future. You can note some of the projects that are on the horizon or possibly some of your goals or initiatives that you're looking at to accomplish. And make sure to note your methodology. What sources did you use? And lastly, stats and stories. Make sure that you don't over rely on one or the other because it will diminish the value of that report. Okay, Matt. So presenting your story, once you've got that report ready to go, I recommend setting up an annual schedule for reporting to your internal and external leadership and stakeholders. Regular reporting, I find, encourages a regular review of data. So for example, I shared some reports that I do a deep dive into. I would also recommend running your workforce skills gap report quarterly, just to kind of keep on top of those positions that are open and that are becoming a problem for your businesses. And then your audience or stakeholders that you should consider presenting your information to, your city council or departments within the city that provide or oversee some of those community services that are rated. Of course, your chamber board or the chamber's committees. The Growth Alliance has a workforce committee that really stays on top of the needs and provides initiatives. So it's important that they have the data as well. Your county supervisors, your state decision makers, partner organizations or community service providers. I noticed that on the new Synchronist survey form, Main Street, the CVB has been added. So that would be a good example. Also, your workforce organization or workforce services. Also, clearly, we need to communicate back to the businesses so they know that the information that they provided to you is valuable. Also, make sure to communicate some of this information to your schools. And I try to, as much as possible, get out and do a presentation to the service clubs. They are leaders in your community, so they can share your story as well. Lastly, don't forget that data can also be used, or you can tie it into your city or chamber strategic planning, of course, to develop public policy or programs and to market your community. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
I haven't received any questions in chat yet. Does anybody else have any questions before we go on? Hearing none, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn Larson at this time. I'm going to ask Matt to pull up her presentation and he can drive for you, Dawn, if that's okay.
I think we just did Dawn. So take your pick, Laura or Ryan. Who are you going to put on the hot seat next? Laura's going on next. Laura!
Sounds good.
Laura.
You can hold off on sharing, Matt. I'll chat a little bit before I pull up that as an example. So hi, everybody. I'm Laura Thomas. I'm the Research and Analytics Specialist at the Cedar Rapids Metro Economic Alliance. We serve the Benton, Lynn, and Jones County regions, and we're part of the greater ICR Iowa region. I've been there since 2012. I left for a few years, tried the private sector before deciding that I needed to come back because this is where I wanted to work. And I'm lucky enough to just be able to focus on doing the data analysis and reporting for our organization. So any data wrangling, if it's in a spreadsheet, I get to help stay on top of that and manage that. And so that's where I love spending my time. And really just kind of where I get my energy and thrive from that. So I'm lucky enough to work with Mike Lucan and Ron Corbett, and they actually do our interviews. They collaborate with, regional partners to go out to our targeted business list and get those interviews done. They, get that entered in, and then I focus on exporting all that and analyzing it, looking for the takeaways, comparing it to our, other metrics, things like that. And then we are lucky enough to have a graphic designer on staff. So then I might mock up a chart like you saw Christy do in Excel. And then our graphic designer kind of replicates it in her fancy programs. But really, I love making charts in Excel and PowerPoint. You can do those easy tweaks and get a really nice looking product. And I agree, you don't need a graphic designer. It's nice if you have one, but if not, you can get a good report done. So I am going to have Matt share page 3, and this is I just brought along our last printed report. So we do a multi-page booklet of all of our findings, and that piece gets taken along. There we go. So it's 2018. 2019's got put on hiatus because that's right when the pandemic started. And basically, it's like we had all this data from like a really thriving economic year, when the world was starting to fall apart, and we're like, well, this doesn't seem super relevant and timely, so we're not going to put our energies towards making a report. We're going to keep that good knowledge, but also we had to pivot. We had to change strategy. And I mean, that's what this data, that's actually the great part of having this data, is it's so timely. And so anyway, so we're going to look at 2018's, and can you scroll down? Oh, that is page 3, PDF page 3. There, that's the page I wanted to share. The next one. Yep, that one. So my process when I go through and I look at our data is to find all the takeaways, find the nuggets, look at the numbers, see where we're like right in line with the state, see where there's some differences. I feel lucky enough that we have, I think it's 12 years of data now, 11 years of data. And so if you can put that all together and look at your trends over time, that's really helpful. You can see dips and changes. For instance, childcare. I watched that line change directions. We had on the roads and streets ranking question. That one started improving about like several years into our Paving for Progress, which was our like local Cedar Rapids investment in redoing the streets. So we saw a policy get enacted, we saw actual infrastructure improvements, and then the ranking went up. And that's actually a couple pages down. So I was able to like connect the local policy and like the local things on the ground to what we're seeing in the data. And that's one thing I would recommend and encourage you, I think it's a couple more pages, is try to make those local connections. So you have this data, but like put it in context, what is going on, that's part of that storytelling too. It's like, okay, I have this nugget from the Synchronist data, but then how does that fit into the bigger puzzle? How does that fit into what your city, your county, your region is actually doing? And you can see that play out in the data. And it's something that you probably talk about and have that conversation with your partners, like, oh, well, we know people are generally feeling better about streets. And then you see it in the data. And when the data backs up that story, I think it's even more powerful. And then you can see there also another thing about putting it in context, like several other people have said, comparing it to the larger region or the state, or I know for a while, Synchronist had a multi-state data set that they were sharing, which is what you're seeing as the nation bar, that dark blue bar. That's really helpful because if you just share one number, you can talk about that one number and that's great. But when you take that one number and say, we're this much bigger than the state, or we're this much lower, and what that means, or we were really close to the state several years ago, and now there's actually a significant difference. That really highlights what that number means. So that's another thing I'd encourage you is like put it in context, whether that's time, whether it's the geography, and whether that's your local story. So if you could go back up, Matt, to that third PDF page. Thank you. So the reason why I like this page, and I wanted to share specifically with you, is it combines a bunch of different ways that I tied in displaying the data. So kind of like the percentages on the left, right? So those were all ones that were like big takeaways, 82% are in the growing life cycle phase, 73% report that company sales are increasing, right? These are like big, powerful talking points that you just can get out there and see like, wow, we have all this growth, things are going well. And, by making that number big and adding a little label, it's just a nice way to call that out. We have it here in a fancy thing, but like Christy was saying with the smart art, with the word art, they have a template for this right in there. So you can replicate something that looks really similar to this. You can see on the left, those column charts, put those metrics in comparison to the different regions, right? Putting that in context. And I just pulled out like, okay, well, growing, we want to see how that relates to the state. So I know there's, different options for that question. But I wanted to, we wanted to tell the story of that one specific one and how that's comparing, so we can pull that one out, segment your data. Another thing when I talk about putting it in context, is you have this data set, but also how does it compare to data from the census, from the BEA? So I'm lucky. I get to swim in this data all the time. But we have great resources here to be able to get those metrics, from whether it's, Drew and Christy at UNI or the state, and you can get those metrics because it makes it, again, kind of weaves that story together, right? In 2018, business was growing, the economy was, doing well, things were thriving. I also added that GDP growth chart. I added the regional employment chart just to, again, kind of be like, look, things are doing well. And so by putting all those right next to each other, it really kind of plays out the bigger picture. So, putting them in context. Yeah, those are kind of the big takeaways that I wanted to share with everyone. If anybody has questions or Matt scrolled past a page that looked interesting, we can. The workforce questions I always think were interesting because watching that availability kind of like dwindle over the decade, while all the other indicators stayed like tightly high, like that's so cool, right? Like, because we all knew that workforce availability was struggling, but we have great work ethic in Iowa, and like that's what you're seeing it play out in that chart. So I know I get really excited about it. My coworkers tease me about it all the time. Oh, and infographics. So like this cost of living one, like you can just grab a little house icon off the internet, and a little price tag. And like, so we just picked out a couple metros that, people might think of like, oh, should I go here? Because we take these on all our significant visits, with whether it's a synchronous visit or just like a relationship call, just anything. It's a great collateral piece to have on hand, and be able to point stuff out based on how the conversation goes. So cost of living and average commute, is talked about a lot when we're trying to get workforce here. And so being able to use a cost of living comparison on the map. And then on the left, you can see like in addressing workforce challenges, we tie in strategies, both from the region that we're doing, that we know the city's doing. It's collaborative. It's, I think it's great to pull in those stories, and those partners, those stakeholders also love that because, you're showing kind of that strength, kind of like David was saying, we're all working together to have a healthier state. And so if you can pull in your regional stakeholders to help tell the story, it really shows that cohesiveness in the messaging, and just makes it a fascinating read. All right, that's pictures, infrastructure, airport. Yep, that's what I got. So thanks, Matt.
All right. Thanks, Laura. Does anybody have any questions for Laura before we move on? And we'll have time at the end. So if you think of them, you can throw them in the chat screen too. All right. Thank you. We're going to move on now to Ryan Carroll with the Greater Des Moines Partnership. He's going to talk to us about what they do in that region. Ryan.
Very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Ryan Carroll from the Greater Des Moines Partnership. Just a little bit of background about our organization. We actually represent 10 counties here in central Iowa. So those are Marshall, Guthrie, Dallas, Polk, Jasper, Poweshiek, Adair, Madison, Warren, and Marion counties. So we've got geographically a pretty big cross section that we represent here. And we've got a lot of communities who are out there doing their own synchronous call programs. And in a lot of cases, particularly around the metro area, we actively participate in those visits with our partners. But then we also have a lot of our, a large section of our service territory are individual communities and county organizations and smaller regional groups who are out doing their own synchronous call programs. And so just so everyone knows, last year was actually the first time that we tried to take all of that information and essentially aggregate that together and create one report from all of the different groups in the 10 county area. That had never been done previously. Really how it had worked in the past is, a lot of our communities went out and executed their program, and then we have several of them that would do really their own reports, but we had never tried to look at it from a regional perspective before. So for those of you that are on the call that have not put together a report before, I was certainly in that position just a year ago in terms of, trying to figure out what we needed to look at, going through the data and trying to understand what is really a diverse ecosystem of businesses here in central Iowa. And not unlike Laura, unfortunately, as we were going through the process of trying to get that report completed, COVID hit, and the decision was made that we also needed to pivot away from finishing that actual report and moving on to more important things. So unfortunately, I don't have anything visually I can show you today, but what I did want to do is just kind of talk about that process that I went through as somebody that kind of did this from the first time perspective, just some different things that I was trying to look at from the regional perspective. And I can certainly kind of walk you through the elements that we're going to go into that report. And so really where I started was just taking a look at the information from our 10 counties, like that's been talked about previously, and kind of bump that up against the state. So it was just a very basic set of information. Wanted to look and see just kind of how we stacked up as a region against the state. And as it turned out, we had 164 visits that were done through our 10 counties by 20 different communities. We had a cross section of industry that varied from manufacturing, insurance, financial services. We had some in the engineering space, the warehouse logistics space, and then a few others. And so we had, again, a really diverse cross section of businesses that were all going into that one singular report. And one of the things that I really had to think about is trying to, looking at the data itself, certainly is one thing. We've certainly done a lot of that in the past. Using the data is certainly different than creating a report. And so what I mean by that is that first sort of general report that we created where we compared ourselves against the state, I would say that was kind of more of an internal piece that we used. We presented that to our Regional Economic Development Board. That was something that we used internally so that we could really kind of get a feel for, where our positive areas are, our areas of strength, and then certainly where any areas were that were potentially weaknesses or areas that we needed to address. And so we got a really good sense from looking at that of kind of what the lay of the land was. So there wasn't anything too flashy that went into that, but where it really becomes challenging, I think, for a regional group and generating a report and having that as a document that would live on our website, that would be published, something that could be certainly out there in the business community here locally. But the other side of it is we're really kind of the major intake on the business attraction side of things. And so I had to be really thoughtful about, if we're going to put together a regional report that's going to live on our website, there's a really good chance that businesses from outside of our region, site selection consultants, and other folks would potentially want to take a look at that report. And so I was very careful about some of the things that I put in there, especially in terms of things that could be viewed as a negative for our region. And so, for example, this has come up before, the workforce availability statistic was not very good, as I'm sure it is for a lot of you. And so rather than show that information, instead, we focus more on like our workforce attributes and things of that nature. So I just want to share that, and I think it's really important before you kind of sit down and try to put this together is be really thoughtful about who are you going to be sharing that information with. So if you're in an individual community and you're going to be sharing this with your mayor, your council, city manager, your board, those kinds of things, I think you have a little bit more leeway in terms of really sort of painting that broader picture and showing some of the areas that you really need to work on and improve on, so that those folks understand that, so that they know what those action items need to be, as opposed to kind of working for a larger regional group where if we put workforce availability is very bad in this region, and somebody kind of catches wind of that from the outside, that could certainly be used against us and potentially get us eliminated from consideration for projects and that different type of thing. And so what I really looked at from kind of the regional piece of it is basically we started off just kind of telling the story of what we were doing and why we were doing it. So talked a lot about basically here's the geographic area that we are covering. Here are the communities that were engaged in this process. Here's how many visits that we completed, and here is the time frame that those visits were completed in. And the next area that I went to was kind of focusing on some key findings that we had from collecting that information. And so what I really had to do is from that is really kind of go through and take a little deeper analysis of what that information actually was. And it was sort of interesting because as I looked at the industry breakdown, what I found is it didn't necessarily match in terms of who those calls were executed with really what the lay of the land here honestly is. And so what I found is we had about 50% of our calls were done with manufacturers, and only about 15% were done really kind of in that insurance and financial services section. And so I really had to kind of keep that in mind as I was putting my information together, that it didn't necessarily tell the whole story, because we frankly didn't do enough visits with insurance and financial services companies in that particular year to kind of get that broad section of what we really look like. And so from the key findings perspective, what I did is I just kind of tried to pull out some things that really, again, kind of help tell our story here. And so in looking at that, again, with insurance, financial services, manufacturing, a lot of that manufacturing is tied into agriculture. So those two verticals on their own are fairly mature from the industry side of things. And so in looking at the data itself, what I found is that over 80% of our companies that we talked to were or had released new products and services over the last year. More than 70 we're looking at doing over the next 3 years, coming out with new products and services. 2/3 of them were increasing their R&D activities, and yet another almost 80% were increasing their sales. And so kind of the message there, the story there is that, yes, we have some kind of mature verticals here in our market, but with that being said, there's a lot of innovation that is going on in those spaces that is really kind of instituting growth in both of those areas, which is really carrying Central Iowa forward. So I really made sure that we kind of spelled that out in terms of just looking at the raw data and then applying that story to it. And really kind of the other things that we highlighted in addition to that, we're kind of looking at, again, some of those things that we talk a lot about here at the regional level. So pulling out a lot of the information that came out about basically why those businesses are located here. And I think that's one of the great things that you can find from really kind of digging into that data is you kind of really get to that question of why are they here? Because in a lot of cases, they could really almost be anywhere that they chose to be. And so you kind of start to drill that down. And it was interesting, again, looking at a 10-county area, you almost have to kind of break it down a little bit more by industry to get a real true sense of the responses in some of those things. But certainly location is something that comes up a lot here in central Iowa, which isn't a surprise, given the fact that we're located at the crossroads of interstates 80 and 35. We've got the Des Moines International Airport. And so we're able to kind of tell that story about, why central Iowa is a great location from the accessibility standpoint. Another thing that really comes up pretty frequently is our business climate here is good. And so, you can kind of look at that too from the workforce side of things as well. That kind of comes into play with that a little bit too. So, we have some, obviously I mentioned we have workforce availability challenges, just like everybody else. I mentioned that we rate really well in terms of how productive and stable those folks are. And it's interesting talking to some of those insurance and financial services companies, for example. They say that talent base is very important to them, that it is here. So Des Moines itself has, roughly over 80 insurance companies that are headquartered here. And so it's bringing a lot of insurance talent to our market and to our area. And so, being able to kind of talk some about that too, as far as having that good workforce that is attracted to those industries that we're able to bring in was kind of another key component of that. Quality of life is something that comes up pretty frequently as well, as far as kind of a strength. And it was interesting to kind of look at that. It could be for totally different reasons. So if you're a business that's located in downtown Des Moines, that could be because you can walk to a lot of different restaurants, a lot of different amenities, those types of things, and then you can kind of get out more into maybe rural Iowa where those set of circumstances could be totally different in terms of what that quality of life looks like compared to what it looks like in the city. And so again, kind of trying to tie those ideas into those different industries and show, globally, we rank really high on those things, but kind of breaking that down further, here is where it fits in this industry, and here's where it fits a little bit differently in another industry. Community attributes was another thing that we certainly kind of looked at as well as we were kind of trying to decide what to represent in that space. And so as all of you know that have gone through the survey process, there's a lot of different things that are on there that you're gathering information on, whether it's police, fire, those types of things. And again, if you're in a smaller community and you are, presenting this information to a mayor, a council, those types of things, that information is going to be really important to share with them. But kind of zooming that out from a regional perspective, it is not necessarily as relevant. The numbers came back pretty strong, I think, across the board with everything that we were doing. And so again, I'm kind of looking at this as if a site selection consultant or a potential business is looking at Greater Des Moines as a place where they may want to potentially expand or grow into, and they see that report, what are some of those things that may be attractive to them? So I pulled out, for example, the high rankings that we have in our schools, community colleges, universities, healthcare system, transportation system, some of those different types of things that just kind of show that picture. In terms of how we laid out the information and the direction that we were going with that, we really chose, and this was brought up previously, to, we did some descriptive parts of that. So we try to keep as little verbiage as I guess as possible while still being able to tell the story. And then we definitely relied more on some infographics and some other things to kind of keep the report a little bit more concise in terms of what it's showing. And again, something that just kind of paints a picture of our region that really kind of helps tell our story that, hey, this is a great place for those industries. This place is growing. Some of we have a lot of different rankings for best place to live, best place to raise a family, do some of those different types of things. So really kind of trying to keep those same themes and engaged in the report, and really kind of helping tell that story from that regional perspective. And so I will say it was challenging to really kind of sit down the first time and go through and try to figure out, what did I want to talk about? Because again, we have this very large and diverse area that we are covering. We have local communities who are doing their own reports and doing a fantastic job of those, of sort of drilling down into some of the things that Dawn and Laura talked about, for example, of really getting sort of deeper into the information and really being able to identify some very specific areas within their respective communities, both of what's going well and then maybe some areas where they need to look for improvement or maybe to move some additional resources. And so, again, I guess maybe some other things I would share for folks that haven't gone through this process before is, if you're starting from square one, I would really encourage you to engage with the Best of Iowa folks as early as you can in that process. And I think they've just done such an excellent job. They're there to help. They want you to be successful in your program. So Matt Codis and Kelly Swenson have been great partners of mine in terms of being able to get me data and information that is out there. Drew's another great resource from that perspective. So, have a conversation with those folks, sit down and talk to them, and really kind of try to figure out what your angle is and what your approach is going to be. I mentioned it before, but just also really keep in mind just who that audience is going to be that you want to see that report, and be careful if this is something that's going to be shared, maybe externally outside of your community, even though you've got a lot of information at your fingertips and you can really include all of that in a report and show, strengths and weaknesses. If that's something that's going to be sort of an external thing, be really careful about, sort of highlighting those weaknesses, because you don't want that information to be potentially used against you. And again, you can take the data, you can use that data on your own, you can share that data internally and use that to kind of help you make decisions on what you're going to do and what your programs are going to be. But like in our case, I mean, we want to make sure that we're highlighting the things that we feel like that we're doing well here in our region, and basically kind of using that as a way to kind of help tell our story. And so I think with that, that's really all.
You brought us right up to the deadline. Great job. Hey, well, we got time for a couple quick questions for Ryan, if anybody has one. I've got some that people put in the chat, and we'll come back to those at the end. But anybody have anything for Ryan real quick? All right, Ryan, Laura, Don, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing that. We are going to move on to the next part of our talking about social media and your data. And joining us from Goldsboro with Flashman Hilliard. Justin, I see you coming up now. I am going to turn it over to you. Thank you and welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share my presentation. Hope you all are having a good day, good afternoon. You're not can stand one more Teams presentation, right? Mine's about 20 minutes, so we'll get through it pretty quickly. Let me choose what I'm going to share here. I would say, but while I'm pulling this up, if you all have questions throughout, feel free to, either shout them out or put them in the chat. Either way is just fine. And I will try to pay attention to that some, but Matt and team, if you all see something come up with the chat that I'm not catching, feel free to bring it up as well, just because I'm on the screen share too, so it's a little hard to see. Sound good? Okay.
Sounds excellent. Thanks.
All right, good deal. So let's move in. Thank you guys for the time today. I'm going to talk a little bit about some social media recommendations specific to some of the survey content that I know has been shared with you all recently, but also just I think a lot of these learnings will apply to how you manage your social for your organizations in general. So hopefully there'll be some learnings that go, beyond as well. So we're going to start talking about audience, because that's where I like to start with any type of marketing effort. And then we're going to talk about developing content for your audience, and then how you reach that audience on social. And then we're going to go over 5 things that you can do today, because I think it's important when we have these types of conversations to at least identify a few things that you can, that are kind of that are tactical, that you can go take away from this presentation and act on in the next week or so. And then we'll have some more time for Q&A at the end if questions don't come up during the presentation. So let's start by talking about your audience and identifying that audience. And to me, this is the most important part, like I said, of any marketing effort that you do. So, and if you're going to use social media or other channels, my background is in integrated marketing. And integrated marketing is sort of a, industry term or buzzword. What really means is that you're identifying who your customer or your audience is. You can see that they're in the center, right? So it's all about audience in the center. And then you can see the variety of channels in the circle surrounding that audience that you can use to connect with your constituents, right? So social media is at the top. It's obviously an important channel. That's what we're going to talk about today. But you will always hear me in a presentation like this say, don't operate social media in a silo, and make sure that you're paying attention to the other channels that you all are using. If you're using email marketing, and that's working really well. If you're doing something with print and direct mail, your website, all of those channels need to be working together and playing a role to connect with your constituents. And the other thing to think about when you identify your audience, and you all may have much more robust data about your audience than I do, but a lot of people today, regardless, working professionals, right? This is sort of a high level encapsulation of their lives. They're experiencing some level of what you see here, right? And we don't need to go through all the logos across all of these different, times of the day or events during the day, but it's basically, the point is that they've got screens in front of them. They're looking at media. They're looking at content throughout the day, right? From the moment they wake up, especially if their phone is used as their alarm. I've been told I'm not supposed to do that, so I'm gonna have to try to find a new alarm clock one of these days. To when they're maybe taking a break at work, they're going back to work, on their commutes. They're in touch with media there. When they get back home, having time with their family, and then even wind down time, right? So there's a lot of different sort of content we're competing against when we're trying to get their attention, right? So we want to know as much about them as possible so that we can make sure the content we're creating is relevant and helpful and aligns with their interests. And then the other thing is, you all have a great sort of advantage in this case, because you have access to this Iowa Best survey that I know you all have data sort of this is just one of the questions from the survey. But you have data at the statewide level, but then also, specific to your locale. So you've got some good information on a number of key topics that your constituents would care about. And so a lot of times, this is the type of information we're going in search of before we develop any kind of social media content strategy or program, because we don't want to do something that we just think, based on our experience, will be relevant. I mean, that has a role. But we also want to make sure, that we have some data backing the fact that it's going to be valuable content for our audiences. So, this survey is definitely an advantage in that aspect. And we'll come back and talk more about how you can sort of promote your survey data, and also how you can use it maybe as a starting point for some other content ideas. So we'll come back to that here in just a bit. One thing I did want to talk about, though, is platform. It's from what I've heard, and you all feel free to chime in if you're using other platforms, but a lot of your organizations are predominantly using LinkedIn or Facebook. And what I like to try to do when looking at sort of the platform set any organization is using is to prioritize, because it takes a lot of work to do social well on even just one platform. And not all platforms should be equal, depending on the audiences that you're trying to reach. So the point of this slide here is that there may be some value in Facebook, and especially if you've had, what I would say is, if you've had good experience in the past reaching your constituents via Facebook, I'm not saying to abandon that. But what I am saying in general is that Facebook is more of a B2C property, just generally. And LinkedIn is more of a B2B property generally. So if you're thinking about the fact that, you know, your audience is for the majority of business professionals, LinkedIn seems to be the platform, you know, to me, where I would put more of my efforts going forward. And we have some statistics to back that up. Number one, you know, LinkedIn has really changed a lot in the last few years. It's become the number one social network for business professionals. LinkedIn used to be sort of like your online Rolodex, right? It was all a big, you know, a social media job site. And that functionality still exists, but content has way outpaced job searching on the platform. And now what you really have, as you can see in that middle stat, is you have a lot of business decision makers using the platform to network, to share thought leadership content, to generate leads, and to engage with, you know, other like-minded business professionals, right? So you can see on the bottom there some of the things that these folks are doing on the platform. 73% are using it for networking, 70% are using it to sort of build up their brand, sort of their online resume, but then they take it beyond that because the content and thought leadership piece becomes part of their identity, right, in the space. And then, you know, they're also using it to keep up with industry news. I mean, more and more we hear from people that, you know, social media and especially LinkedIn is sort of their number one news source. It's the first place they go, and it's where they find out about a lot of you know, news content, even if they may go to another site then to read more about and get the full story. So the other thing about LinkedIn, this just shows sort of the growing prowess of the network, right? So as far as members go on the right, I mean, it's really stepping into legitimacy. Almost 500 million members, or sorry, it's 700 now. So it's, you know, that chart's a couple of years old. It's really taken off in the last couple of years. But you can see the number of company pages that are out there, and how many B2B marketers, specifically 94%, are using the platform, you know, to distribute content. And just a couple of other stats here specific to the B2B use of the platform. You know, 79, this middle stat, 79% of B2B marketers view LinkedIn as an effective source for generating leads. I think generating leads is definitely an opportunity for the platform, but I would say nurturing relationships, you know, of constituents you already have, you know, some kind of, you know, relationship with, and just nurturing that is really one of the easiest things to do on the platform and one of the biggest benefits that you can find. And we'll talk about this in a little more here in a bit, but that comes from sort of a two-pronged approach of posting compelling content, but also having an engagement strategy as well. And so we'll talk about both aspects of that. Lastly, just I mentioned earlier that content has way outpaced the job posting functionality of LinkedIn. Wanted to highlight this stat in the middle here, that it's 15 times more content on the platform than job posting. So just to sort of put that into perspective, you know, that's how much we're seeing content outpace the job functionality, which is really what LinkedIn was known for historically. Now, it's not just a story I want to tell today about LinkedIn and all those data points we just went over, but I also want to talk some about Facebook, because it's not just that Facebook is a B2C platform in general. It's also that Facebook is a very busy platform. There is a lot of competition on the platform. And if you're familiar with the term organic reach means when you post something on Facebook and you don't put paid advertising behind it, it doesn't reach. Say you have a 10,000 followers or likes on Facebook. That post does not reach all 10,000 of those people or show up in their feed on Facebook, right? It shows up in about 2% of people's feed, and that's the high end. So that's another thing to keep in mind too, is organic reach on Facebook continues to decline, and it makes it harder to get visibility to the content that you want your constituents to see on that platform. And this is the simplest yet best chart to show why. As Facebook decreases its organic reach, you can see that its stock price increases. Well, why? Because as they decrease their organic reach, more companies, more organizations are spending money on ads. And so, you know, that simple formula is just highlights the fact that Facebook's a media platform. And, you know, so this is what's going on there. This same concept is happening on other social platforms, including LinkedIn, but not at the pace it's happening on Facebook. And LinkedIn is not as busy of a platform as Facebook is. So there's not as much competition for content real estate. And that's the other thing. So your organic reach is higher on LinkedIn for that reason. The other thing is, just back to that busy concept for Facebook, you're not just competing against other business professionals or peer organizations on Facebook. You're competing against selfies, you're competing against puppy pictures, you're competing against pictures of babies. And like, this may sound funny and kind of like make you laugh, you know, it made me chuckle the first time I heard it, but this is a reality. I mean, think about the type of content that you see and you engage with on this platform, right? I know some businesses that create some very interesting, intriguing content. It's still hard for them to compete with these things on Facebook, right? Especially because these things are all tied to a person's individual network, you know, that's not work related. So they've got a common interest in this content versus the content a business may be creating. So it's challenging to break through on Facebook. So now let's talk about developing content for your audience since we've kind of looked at the audience and the platform landscape, right? So just initially want to highlight on LinkedIn and Facebook some of kind of the key elements of a post. And this may be a review for a lot of you. You may be kind of well beyond this, but it's a nice kind of best practice slide and look at all the elements to think about. So LinkedIn, a good frequency to think of as a starting point is 2 to 3 times a week. There may be another cadence that works better for people, but that's a starting point we recommend a lot of the time. Different formats of content that exist. We've got a list here. You know, you can do a link post linking back to a third-party site. You can use an image. You can do a quote card, which is a common type of content on LinkedIn, you know, highlighting a specific quote in a creative fashion. LinkedIn has carousels now, you know, which you are also on Facebook. So it's a series of images and or videos to tell a story. And then obviously video content, and video content is coming to life a few different ways on LinkedIn. You're seeing just your regular standard video. LinkedIn now has a live functionality that you can apply to have usage of. And you're also seeing video and even images come to life through LinkedIn stories, which are a newer content functionality. And by now you're saying, boy, LinkedIn just seems to copy a lot of the things that Facebook and Instagram do. And you would be accurate if that's what you're thinking. That's correct. So then if you look over at, the post on the right, you'll see where, just some kind of highlights here of the post copy, what we're talking about when we say that, the post image, where your URL will show up. Again, if you upload a video, what that looks like, and then where the URL would show up there and how you can, include a button to learn more. One other thing to think about just overall with content is people have a really short attention span and they look at the creative first. So it's not that you shouldn't pay attention to the copy, but the image, the video, whatever creative element that's being pulled through, that is absolutely the first thing someone's going to look at. And a lot of times that decides whether they stay on that piece of content or whether they move on and, keep scrolling. Now with Facebook, a lot of the pieces on the right are similar, so I won't spend too much time there. Again, a lot of times 1 to 2, 2 to 3 posts a week makes sense here. Some of the same, content opportunities really, in past presentations, these had been fairly different, but like we talked about, since LinkedIn has added carousels, stories, and the live component, a lot of the content opportunities, like the ways you can create content, are the same. One other thing about Facebook, live is available to everybody, live streaming. You don't have to get permission to use it. And stories, and carousels have just been around longer, but really it's a lot of the same type of content formats. And again, just that note about, the creative really driving the opportunity to catch somebody's attention and get them to actually engage. So now let's take an example. Again, I'm going to go back to this remote work policy survey question synopsis here, because I want to just, do a hypothetical, right? So say you got your survey results back for your, county or city, and you're looking at the results and they look something like this to this question, and you think that, return to work or remote work policy is a topic that my constituents care a lot about. So you want to put together, a content plan to address that, right? What might that look like? Well, of course, you could take this graphic, or you could create a graphic similarly that, shares this data, and you could craft a post with that as the visual, with some copy around it, and share the perspective of what people are saying, local businesses are saying when it comes to remote work. And there's some value in that. It's not like that has no value, but let's take a look at some other ways that you could extend that concept, right? So LinkedIn has enabled poll questions recently. That's another type of content you can create. So perhaps you share, a component of that remote work policy question. You might say something like, a third of people across the state of Iowa, or a third of businesses are saying they will continue their current remote work policy. Does your company plan to continue its remote work policy? And then you could have a poll question, yes or no, or you could ask something more specific about allowing people to work from home in the future. However you wanted to shape it, but that's a little more engaging. It's gives people a chance to. You're more likely to get people to engage in that type of content. A supporting content series. So maybe if you're sharing, that example about remote work, maybe then you develop a series of 2 or 3 or 4 posts beyond that, where you're, maybe sharing an article that gives a point of view on the change in remote work policies. Maybe you're promoting a webinar, like our third idea there. Maybe you're going to do a webinar for your constituents so they can share learnings about remote work policy with each other, right? So maybe that's one of the posts in your supporting content series, and you're driving people to sign up for that webinar. Or maybe you're just going to do a post, that asks people like what the biggest challenge has been in sort of revamping or looking at their remote work policy. And you can see in the bottom right there, we have the idea to end data posts with questions to try to drive conversation, right? So those could all be elements that fit in a supporting content series. Obviously, live video is a way you could address this as well. Maybe you want to try to have a panel discussion within the platform. And here's the thing I would say is LinkedIn has live streaming video, and you can apply to get, to use it. And if you have questions about that, you can follow up through Matt, and I can help give you and Deb, and I can get you the information. But you don't have to use live video. I mean, some people are very comfortable using a platform like a tool like that. Others are not as comfortable. So you could also, do a produced video with a point of view on remote workforce, or just sharing some of the data and information, post it as a post on LinkedIn, and then ask people to share their points of view or their questions, right? And get a conversation thread going that way. And then LinkedIn Flipbook is another thing I just want to make sure you're aware of. So one of the things that LinkedIn does better as a platform, I think, than Facebook and a lot of the others is it allows for the uploading of presentations, or white papers. And in this case, Flipbook is basically, it's sort of a combination of the two. It's a PDF that you create that shows almost as like a series of images that you can flip through as the end user. So if you wanted to, for instance, highlight all the questions that related to remote workforce, and then maybe end with a question of your own shown visually, or a graphic or something of that nature, you could compile that all into one PDF, upload that, and that becomes your image. And so it's sort of like a visual flipbook series as opposed to just one image. So there's some different creative things you can experiment with. What I would say is, if you haven't used some of these options, don't feel hesitant to test them out. Give them a try. Some of you may really like, others you may try one time and say that's not for our organization. And I think that's fine, but it's good to experiment and kind of see what works and maybe what isn't the best tool for you. The other thing to point out here is there are a lot of apps that exist out there to help you from a creative perspective. So you can see in the top left some of the popular photo editing apps for iPhone and Android. In addition to the apps shown on this site, a couple of others. One is Photoshop. If you have any experience with that or have that app, that's a great one to use to edit photos. But some of these apps that you see here, and another app that one of my colleagues was actually telling me about, it's called Foodie, but you don't have to use it just for food related photos, really have just a lot of those filters. They're like 101 photo editing, like a lot of the same kind of things you see when you use Instagram, for example. And she was telling me, this colleague, that she uses those apps almost every time she posts something to social media just to make her photos look better. So again, just something to think about and help sort of from a DIY perspective, right? That helps you do it yourself. Canva is an app that a lot of us at our agency and other peers have been using for years. Actually, we have creative team members who help us a lot of times with graphics, but when we don't have that access, maybe we're working with a small team, Canva is an app that can help you do some of those things yourself. The other thing is, if you looked at the idea of creating a video and thought, it's there's I'm not really having a lot of experience creating produced video content. Couple options where that comes into play. One, just to make sure you're aware that you can pretty easily, I just did it for the first time the other day, actually, record yourself giving a PowerPoint presentation. So if you build out the slides and you put builds in and whatnot, you can go through slideshow mode, speak to the slides, incorporate the builds, and record that as a video. And that may be one way that you want to sort of take a topic like some interesting survey data and take it to the next level and incorporate your point of view or incorporate a related topic that you think people might be interested in. And also then there are some elementary, kind of video editing platforms. Some have been around a long time. That picture in the bottom left is of iMovie, which comes on your iPhone if you have one, and also if you have an Apple computer, comes there. But there's also, I think it's Adobe or Windows Movie Maker, and other apps that can do a lot of the same functionality. And I am by no means a video expert or a producer, and I've used iMovie in multiple job functions to do some, kind of rough editing of video content for social. Thought y'all might find this slide interesting too. Back to just when you're creating this content for social, what's going to stand out the most? And this is an interesting chart of what marketers think stands out the most and what consumers think. And you can see most of the answers are the same. Both think creative, both think we talked about creative being the number one thing. Both think memorable content, impactful, unique is on there both of times. But I think if you look at the consumer perspective, entertaining is not always I don't know that we always think about our content being entertaining first. Maybe I think a lot of times it's more like educational or informative. It's a good reminder that, no matter what industry you're in, entertaining content still stands out to people first. And so just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about how you can be creative with the content that you're developing. Let's see here. So also another thing about social that I always like to bring up, and this is really applicable to LinkedIn here, is the first date analogy. So I talked about this earlier, but make sure that when you're using the platform, you're not just talking about yourself all the time, right? You can see that looks like what's going on in the picture on the right, right? Make sure that you're actually, having conversations with people, whether they're commenting on a post you put out there and you as the brand or the organization are commenting back, or if you're using, your own individual accounts and you're engaging with constituents that way in the comments of their posts, make sure it's just not all about you, right? And so I think that first date analogy plays really well. Beyond that, this social media roadmap has sort of 12 tips to keep in mind. We'll go through these quickly, and then Matt and Deb, I'm happy to send this as a follow-up if you think it'd be a helpful handout for people. But again, build relationships. Don't just straight up sell. Be consistent with your posting. That's a key, and that'll help you with the algorithms. Actively find and make connections. Follow others. Applaud influencers or thought leaders, and share their content. Curating thought leaders' content can be a good way to build your profile, both from your organization or your individual profile. Be responsive. If somebody engages on your content, talk back to them. Use hashtags. LinkedIn has really embraced hashtags in the last couple of years, so search hashtags and use them where appropriate. Quality content over quantity. It's not about how much you put out there. It's more important that you put out quality content. Put your social media accounts in your signature. That's a good way to gain followers. Engage on your customers' content. If you're probably getting the picture of my point of view by now, but engagement on these platforms is just as important as the content that you post as status updates. Provide value-based content, not always just marketing your organization. Share other people's content. So influencers, but also constituents or just other users, and be a source of trending news. We talked about people using the platform for news, so be a source of breaking news and share that content when you see it. So lastly, reaching your audience on social, just want to cover a few ways that you can help. I don't think you can ever game the algorithm and beat it, but here's a couple of things you can do to help your content show up when it's organic, and then a word or two about paid to finish out. So remember, thumb stopping content is what we're trying to create. And thumb stopping means when people are scrolling through their feed and they stop the screen because they want to read the content that you put out there. So ways to do that, 4 principles here: be audience first, be data driven, be holistic, and be long term. So let's talk about each of those. Being audience first means you define your audience, you research it, you know what their passion points are, you know what trends they're interested in, and then you create content that aligns with those things, right? We've talked a lot about that today. Be holistic. Again, this gets back to the integrated marketing visual that we talked about earlier, right? So in addition to social media, what other touch points are you using to connect with your audience? And is the content coming from those touch points aligned? That's a really important thing as far as the picture that you're painting for your audiences. Plan long term, move away from one and done short term tactics. No matter how creative they are, they rarely work. Like even content that goes viral for a time period, it stops. And if there's not a long term plan in place, the relevancy can decline quickly, right? So think about having a steady long term engagement plan and how you're going to connect with your key audiences in social. And then be data driven, right? Let research like we talked about earlier that you all have access to from the survey and other data that you can get your hands on drive your content strategy. And don't be afraid to shift your strategy mid-quarter or whatnot when needed, okay? Because the data can really help you go that route. Last thing, about 1 more minute, should be wrapped up here because I know we're almost at time. Just because you post it doesn't mean somebody sees it. So if you have any kind of budget to experiment with paid media on social, please do figure out a way to test that out and try it, because that's a way to ensure that the people you want to reach are actually seeing your content, right? And the strategic value of paid social, won't cover all these things, but really the biggest thing is that you're getting your content in front of the audience that you created it for if you're using paid. So lastly, 5 things you can do today, and then we'll wrap up here. 1, review the survey data that you have access to so you can know your audience better. 2, plan how you'll share that survey data on social, and we talked about some of the ways you could do that. 3, download one of the creative apps we discussed, to do it yourself. 4, engage with the constituent on his or her social post, or if they've commented on one of your posts. And then 5, schedule a paid social test and learn, or at least discuss the viability of whether paid social might be something that you could test. So that wraps up the content we're going to overview for you today. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you very, very much, Justin. Do we have any
Absolutely.
questions? I don't see any in chat, so. And once again, we'll make this recording and all the handouts that we've had today and presentations available to everybody afterwards. Matt will get those out to everybody that participated today. Last call, anybody got any questions? Brian?
Can I ask a question? Yeah, Justin, great presentation.
Thank
Can
you.
you just talk a little bit about, on paid social, hitting demographics in paid and, strategies for defining, refining audience to come up with the right approach to who we want to target?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. I mean, LinkedIn really does give you a lot of ability to create audiences. So you can go in, to the targeting platform once you have an ad account set up, and you can search people by company, by industry, by job type, by job skill. So I would really encourage you to spend some time sort of, playing around with that functionality, experimenting with it to get to a refined audience that you think really meets, or is aligned with the audience you want to reach. Then what I would say though is test that, right? So if you have let's just make a number up, have $1,000 budget to spend, take $200 of it and spend it testing that audience and see what the results look like. Do you feel like it's reaching the right people? If not, maybe you need to adjust it, right? So don't put all your budget behind that first try, because it's a lot of test and learn with paid. It really is. The other thing, Brian, is if you have any type of database that you use for email or anything else, just so you guys know, you can upload those to LinkedIn and you can create lookalike audiences. They call them matched audiences based on those databases. So a lot of times, if you already have that type of a database, that's a great place to start. And you just upload it to the platform and then you say, find people on LinkedIn that look like these people, right? and then you can adjust the geography, you know, the location and other criteria that you would care about as you're developing your audience. Yep, great question.
We got time for maybe one more question. Well, once again, this is a reminder, if you have any questions, you have any concerns, you need any help, you can reach out to any of your energy companies, Black Hills, Iowa Area Development Group, Alliant Energy, Mid-American. We're here to help. You'll get the information from Matt. You can run us down. But great information today. Hopefully we're going to be out again, visiting people in person, talking to our communities, and life is going to get back to normal this year. So one last call for any questions. All right, hearing none. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to all the presenters. Greatly appreciate your time today. And everybody enjoy the rest of the sunny day out there today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.